11, 1998, at about 10:30 a.m., a car bomb exploded outside the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi, Kenya. 9 minutes later, and hundreds of miles to the south, another explosion outside another American embassy. This one in the Tanzanian capital of Dar es Salaam. More than 200 people were killed in the two-pronged attack. One of the plotters, carrying a poorly forged passport, was detained at Pakistan's Karachi airport just hours after the bomb went off. He later confessed his involvement to intelligence officials. Another suspect was arrested by Kenyan officials and handed over to FBI agents. He confessed to his role in the bombing during a week of interrogations. Bin Laden was later implicated in the attack.
On the embassy bombings, you've got the best law enforcement case indicating bin Laden's involvement. You have the plea bargain of one of the senior members of the organization basically saying, he sent me to Kenya in 1993 to go and photograph the embassy there, and then when I showed him the photographs, he said, that's where we can put the truck bomb. Case closed.
13 days after the bombing, U.S. cruise missiles rained on bin Laden targets in Afghanistan and Sudan.
Today, I ordered our armed forces to strike at terrorist-related facilities in Afghanistan and Sudan.
But bin Laden emerged unharmed. He and his key aides had anticipated the U.S. would retaliate and vacated their main training camp in eastern Afghanistan. The unsuccessful attack elevated bin Laden to cult figure status among Muslim fundamentalists. New Year's Eve 2000. Amid fears concerning the Y2K bug, a different kind of catastrophe was waiting to happen. Terrorist plans to attack celebrations in Seattle, bomb LAX airport in Los Angeles, sink a U.S. warship refueling in the Middle East, and bomb tourist sites in Jordan. The attacks were foiled. They were linked to followers of bin Laden. Later last year, on October 12th, an attack that didn't fail. Two suicide bombers pulled a small boat alongside the USS Cole as it was refueling in Yemen. The blast blew a hole the size of a house in the hull of the Navy destroyer and killed 17 U.S. sailors. U.S. intelligence officials say bin Laden's fingerprints are unmistakable. During the last several years, it is believed bin Laden has been hiding out in the remote mountains of Afghanistan, a rugged terrain he knows very well. The country is dominated by the Taliban, a movement of religious students turned warriors who have imposed their harsh interpretation of Islam. The Taliban have declared that bin Laden is their guest, providing he does not attack other nations. The shadowy figure made a rare public appearance in a videotape that emerged from Afghanistan at the beginning of this year. It shows bin Laden at the wedding of his son to the daughter of a longtime aide. So far, bin Laden's elusive ways have kept him beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement. He is thought to change his residence continually, often moving at night. But he still manages to get his message out.
They've essentially fused two very different things. One is a sort of almost medieval reading of Holy War based on some medieval Muslim scholars with the most up-to-date technologies available today. I mean, bin Laden and his folks use satellite phones. They use the internet to get their message out.
Bin Laden's latest message, in the propaganda recruiting video that surfaced this summer, implies more action aimed against the United States.
On the tape, bin Laden specifically says, basically, I was responsible for these series of anti-American attacks, including the Cole in Yemen, and he concludes the tape by saying, the victory of Yemen will continue.
In his interview with CNN back in 1997, he made this chilling warning about his future plans.
You'll see them and hear about them in the media, God willing.
CNN's Mike Vetra, and I apologize. In my conversation earlier with Aaron Brown, I misleadingly suggested what you were going to see was Peter's interview with bin Laden from 1997. What you saw was Mike Vetra's profile. Still, few Westerners have had contact at all with Osama bin Laden, and CNN's terrorism analyst Peter Bergen, as I mentioned, as the piece told you, did have an opportunity to meet bin Laden while producing an interview for CNN in 1997. He joins us with more. Peter, good evening, or good morning almost. Here I think is a question that must puzzle anyone who watched this piece. In the twisted logic of bin Laden, one can at least understand attacks on Americans in other places. They're in Saudi Arabia, where non-Muslims are not supposed to be. They're in Somalia. The USS Cole is in waters around Yemen. When did it begin to become clear that he or someone was prepared to take these tactics to the United States, not aimed at soldiers but civilians, and inflict the most horrific sorts of death on thousands of people?
Well, I think it's clear from what we know about some of the suspects. Some of them have been in this country in the United States since as early as 1994. So this plan has been in the works for quite some time. And I think if you look at the first bombing of the World Trade Center, a lot of bin Laden's people were sort of on the peripheries of that. And I think they basically came back to do what they had started. Why are they attacking the United States directly rather than the Middle East? I think perhaps if you're a terrorist, you have a political mission in mind, right? You don't just blow things up for no purpose. And bin Laden may be perhaps frustrated that his actions against the U.S. embassies in Africa and also against the Cole didn't really get any discussion going about what he's actually asking for. I think that we've begun to talk a little bit about what his demands are. I'm not saying that his demands are in any way negotiable, since they are rather comprehensive, including the withdrawal of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia and basically changing U.S. Middle Eastern policy entirely. But at least they're being talked about. I mean, I don't think this guy is a madman. I think that he has, his outcomes may be mad, but I think his underlying logic is that by drawing attention to what he's saying, and perhaps out of frustration that his previous actions really didn't get much examination of the message he's trying to get out. Perhaps that's why these attacks have been undertaken.
Is there, if in fact this results in regimes like the Pakistani government in fact changing radically its policy, is there any notion that even within his own world he might conclude that this was a grave mistake, that it's the straw that broke the camel's back, that even allies or sympathizers within his own world would just say, that's beyond the pale?
I think he's looking on this, we don't know 100% yet, but it's 98% that it was him, as a fantastic victory. And my concern really is the following. On Monday, before the Trade Center bombings, I think bin Laden was, regarded as being a pretty smart guy in terms of terrorist attacks. Tuesdays are so Machiavellian, so devilishly brilliant. I mean, you're dealing with somebody who's really quite smart, and he has thought through certain things. He has thought through that there's going to be an American response. He's not sitting there waiting for that response to happen. He's thought through what that response might be, and presumably is planning his own response to it when it does happen. And I think a very significant thing, Jeff, is that about 24 or 36 hours before the Trade Center blast happened, Ahmad Shah Massoud, the very well-known and distinguished general who was leading the opposition to the Taliban, was assassinated by two Arabs who was almost certainly working for bin Laden. So bin Laden was already thinking through what the next stage would be, because if the United States is going to go into Afghanistan, one of the first ports of call would be the alliance fighting the Taliban, asking them for information, asking them for military help, and by assassinating the man who basically held that coalition together against the Taliban, and who was also a rather brilliant general, you've got rid of a potential problem immediately. So I think my concern now is that bin Laden is planning some other way. Perhaps the Trade Center is almost a come-on for the United States to come in and face whatever plan he has. So I don't want to go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Peter.
I don't want to paint him as sort of the most brilliant guy in the world, but I mean, I think that Tuesday's events show that we're dealing with somebody an order of magnitude smarter than we were dealing with previously, and somebody who seems to have wrong-footed the United States government at every step. The U.S. embassy bombings in Africa, the United States was worried about stuff in the Middle East. The United States wasn't worried about Africa. The bombing of USS Cole in Yemen was an unprecedented attack on a U.S. warship. No one had conceived that that might be possible. Obviously, the Trade Center thing, you've got dozens and dozens of people who are in some way implicated in this. Think about the discipline of this organization, Jeff. You've got to have, we have 19 hijacking suspects who died on those planes. They must have 2 or 3 Confederates. So that's somewhere a figure between 50 and 100 people. None of these people blabbed about what their plans were. None of them made stupid mistakes that got them arrested. The cells operated in an extremely secretive way, and the United States government, despite the fact it spends billions of dollars a year on counterterrorism measures, had no inkling of this.
So
it's a very disciplined group.
What you're suggesting is that in some sense, if the United States, we have strongly implied we're going to do, goes after states that have given aid and comfort to bin Laden, that in fact he is in fact playing a chess game in which he is one move ahead of us, that he's anticipated that and has a strategy to deal with that, or a counter move?
I would say this assassination of Massoud by his people, the leader of the opposition of the Taliban, is an indication that I don't think this is a coincidence that you're removing the main opposition to the Taliban, his allies, within 36 hours before this trade center bombing took place. I just think the order of coincidence is too high. Massoud has been fighting the Taliban for 5 years. Suddenly he disappears off the face of the map because of an assassination by bin Laden's men. I think they're related.
All right, Peter Bergen, CNN analyst, one of the few Westerners ever to talk to Osama bin Laden. Thank you very much for joining us. I suspect there are some more sleepless nights ahead based on both what you said and what we've seen. Thank you, Peter. Speaking of possible responses, the Pakistani delegation has arrived in Kandahar, Afghanistan. This team reportedly plans to issue an ultimatum, hand over Osama bin Laden. And CNN's Kamal Haider joins us on the phone from an undisclosed location in the region. Good morning or good evening to you, as the case may be, Kamal.
Yeah, it's 8:30 in the morning over here, Afghan Standard Time. This delegation has arrived in Kandahar. They are basically carrying a message from the U.S. authorities. So basically they're only relaying that message. They're expected to meet with Mullah Umar, the Supreme Taliban leader, this morning in Kandahar. The mood, meanwhile, in Kandahar remains defined, and there's very little expectation from this meeting, except that the letter or the concerns of the U.S. government are to be handed over to the Taliban authorities. Jeff?
Kamal, given the past support from Pakistan for the Taliban, economic support, political support, and I'm going to ask this very bluntly, are we to take this at face value, or is there some sense that what we are seeing is something of a piece of stagecraft designed to make the United States feel better without accomplishing anything?
Well, I think the Pakistan authorities have in the past had a good relationship with the Afghan governments, consecutive Afghan governments, because of Pakistan's 20 years of involvement in the Afghan war, in the sense that Pakistan was a frontline state against the Russian occupation of Afghanistan and a great ally of the United States. The Pakistani authorities have lost the leverage that they used to have on a government which acts more independently. Afghans have always made their own decisions in the end, and they have not been subservient to anybody, be that Pakistan or any other power. Jeff?
Kamal, I'm not going to ask you to predict the likelihood of success, but if the Taliban does not do what the Pakistani government says it wants, what response can the Pakistani government make? Kamal?
Well, the Pakistani authorities have made it very clear that they stand with the international world on this issue. I think the talks between the Pakistani and American authorities have established that Pakistan is likely to provide America with all possible assistance. Those signals are coming from the foreign ministry. Internally within Pakistan, there is tremendous opposition because they feel that Osama bin Laden is being used as a scapegoat. And here in Afghanistan, there is now a feeling emerging that they should keep the doors of negotiations open and not slam them shut. So at this moment in time, the Pakistani authorities nor any other government can prevail on the government of Afghanistan. They seem to be making decisions on their own without taking into account what that may have for them as a future, for their future. Yes?
Kamal Haider, thank you very much for joining us. You can tell the nature of this story by the fact that all we can say is that he is at an undisclosed location in the region. Now, coming up for the next couple of hours, something new at CNN. It is a chance for you to talk